Does the hand your Counter-Strike model shoots with really matter? The Counter-Strike community rioted when CS2 launched without the option to switch which view model you could use. In theory, it was all memes. What side of the screen your gun is on shouldn't matter. But when the long-awaited Bob update finally did arrive, certain players claimed that it boosted not only their confidence, but their performance.
Now, when I'm just peeking somewhere or just going somewhere, it's like, I will kill him.
Is it a 2-on-2?
Woxic has the flank. It's like he knows he's coming.
Yeah. Hunter should be a dead man. There's no way you can win this duel with an angle held like that. Too easy for Woxic. Continues to be a nuisance.
But is it true? Does a view model really improve your aim, or is it just placebo?
Do you think there is literally any correlation between the fact that left-hand model being added to the game, Woxic being a lefty, like it's probably nothing,
synchronize,
but it's kind of crazy, right?
True, actually.
View models have evolved not only over the course of Counter-Strike, but FPS at large, ranging from centered to slanted to something out of a Michael Bay movie. And while they have gotten prettier and better, the question is, can they really make you better?
Just going to recover the best weapon for the job if Woxic lets you. What a drive-by that one was.
All right, so before Bob gets his very own Score esports video, do me a quick favor and like the video, sub to the channel, and flick your mouse cursor over to that notifications button. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term Bob, it's a shorthand for the string of CL_Bob console commands that affect the behavior of your view model in Counter-Strike. The commands themselves have been around for ages, dating all the way back to Quake. CS players just lumped all the commands together and started calling the whole of them Bob. Like he's this weird cousin that helps you play the game. But the Bob commands matter because they affect how your weapons bob and sway when you're strafing, which is a big deal in Counter-Strike. Behaviors such as these provide a visual and almost haptic feedback as to the current state of your counter strafe, which in turn affects accuracy. There are those who actually like a lot of movement, sort of like you're playing a modern Call of Duty, and there are those who prefer as little movement as possible since it minimizes on-screen distractions. It's telling that minimal movement is what Riot set as Valorant's default, since it's what competitive players tend to favor. But when Valve first released Counter-Strike 2, they weren't able to import all of the features from Global Offensive. It took time for certain maps, game modes, and settings to make their way over, Bob included, which understandably irked the community. Like I said, the way that your view model behaves does affect the feel of the game and can affect your accuracy and overall performance. But that wasn't what upset the community the most. The thing they cared about most was that they lost Bob's distant but all too related cousin, CL_right-hand1, and of course, 0. Not being able to alter the movement of your view model is one thing, but not being able to switch it from one side to the other is, for some players, that wasn't just annoying, it was game altering. For years, Counter-Strikers were able to switch between left and right-handed view models. Some liked to switch back and forth, depending on weapon or circumstance, while others kept it static.
CL right hand switches the view model. This will not change how others see you in-game. You can use this, change the key in the middle, and it will toggle between, if you're into that.
But when CS2 launched, that choice was gone, and with it, a sense of comfort and confidence for a lot of the player base. So the player base did what it does best. Memed. For months, every single time Valve released a patch, accompanying notes, or a blog post, there were people roasting them in the comments asking a very simple question. Where the f*** is Bob? And, you know, his cousin. Finally, after a literal year of waiting, Valve appeased the community by releasing an update and an accompanying cheekily captioned video decreeing the addition of both a better feeling, albeit non-customizable Bob, and CL right-hand 0. Why did it take Valve so long? Well, janitorial jokes aside, as War Owl speculated, it probably had to do with the way that bullets and, by extension, view models interact with CS2's new volumetric smokes. In addition to rejigging the console commands, Valve made it so that you could no longer switch while shooting the way you could in CSGO. Instead, it behaved like a full-on weapon switch, meaning you couldn't do it in the middle of a gunfight. Still, as expected, everyone went nuts for the update. Everyone from creators to competitors to to casuals rejoiced in the splendor that was regaining the use of a setting that had existed since 1.6.
Imagine opening your fridge and finding something tasty inside for once. That is what Counter-Strike's latest update feels like. The title of Valve's blog post about it, on the other hand, refers to the new feature to switch between left and right-handed view models.
What the fuck? Look, when I change like this, hello.
But some did more than rejoice. They got their groove back.
Do you think there is literally any correlation between the fact that left-hand model being added to the game, Woxic being a lefty, like it's probably
it does
nothing,
synchronize,
but it's kind of crazy, right?
True, actually. If you were trying to pinpoint the exact moment when Woxic started to have this upswing in form, probably synchronizes quite nicely.
Like it's amazing to see. I think, you know, some of the
Turkish Opera Woxic has always been a bit of an outlier setup-wise. His sensitivity is so high it could make a Quake player blush, and what's more, he's left-handed, which, as I'll explain later, explains his preference for a left-handed view model. So when CS2 finally reintroduced CL_right-hand 0, it was like a homecoming for Woxic.
I think some of the woes for Woxic were probably motivation, which has changed. Like the older you get, the mature you become, but the ability was never in question. But in recent times, it was, because it was like, oh, maybe he can't deliver in modern CS.
Well, he was always this kind of this player that, like, maybe he doesn't have the best comms, or maybe doesn't have
Not great with the util. Now he's better at almost everything.
He does it the full package.
And now he's still banging heads.
Yeah.
The question is, to what extent is this real and not just a placebo effect? Back in the earliest days of FPS, view models sat squarely in the center of your screen. It wasn't until shooters entered the modern era that slanted view models even became a thing. But how much do they actually matter? In the real world, when you're engaging in actual marksmanship, placing focus upon one's dominant or non-dominant eye or hand is extremely important. Not only because it affects how you hold your weapon, but how you see and process what's in front of you. But aiming in a video game can't be the same as aiming in real life, right? Well, in order to understand that, we need to understand how these things relate to handedness and ocular dominance, which is a bit technical. So, you know, cue Colton.
And now, the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
We all know what it means to have a dominant hand, but what is ocular dominance? Similar to how folks are left or right-handed, the brain tends to share more neural connections with one eye over the other. Studies have shown that about 70% of the population is right eye dominant, whereas only 30% is left eye dominant. The way to tell if you have a dominant eye is actually pretty simple. Hold out your hands and create a triangle with your thumbs and forefinger. With both eyes open, center the opening on a distant object, something like 3 meters or 10 feet away, and close your left eye. If the object stays centered, then you're right eye dominant. If it shifts, you're left eye dominant. Now, ocular dominance matters tremendously in actual marksmanship, and there's been confusion for years as to whether it also matters in Counter-Strike. The theory has always been that you should use a view model that runs opposite to your dominant eye. The reason being, if your right eye is doing most of the work, you want to remove as much clutter from the right side of the screen as possible. Now, whether that is actually true still remains to be seen. Studies have already shown that ocular dominance with respect to target acquisition, especially moving targets, is a lot more complicated than we initially thought. The reality is that the investigative science detailing how this relates to FPS and esports performance as a whole just hasn't happened yet. My advice, this is something you have to try for yourself and see if you notice a difference. Keep in mind that you don't have to commit to one or the other. Plenty of players switch from left to right hand depending on how they're feeling, which side they're peeking from, or even when they're using specific weapons. As for actual human-handedness, that's where things become a little simpler. Studies have speculated that approximately 10% of the population is left-handed, which means it's considerably rarer than left eye dominance. But the reason for said dominance is the same: the brain and the variance in how both halves develop. In the case of handedness, the desire to have a corresponding view model is both typical, insofar as tons of players prefer it, and understandable. If you're shooting with your left hand on your mouse, it makes sense that you'd want that represented on the screen. Now, to be clear, there are left-handed players who play right-handed and use right-handed view models, and still manage to do shit like this.
Good on these pistols to start that momentum off. Fast play, very fast play, and there it is! Oh my god, Dennis, on cue! I'm done. Don't even buy guns. Just this guy could use a USB for the entire game, and I would be convinced, because G2 certainly has to be convinced it might be the ace, and Dennis with an absolutely perfect round.
Which is just to say that, as with ocular dominance, there is no clear demonstratable advantage when it comes to handedness and a specific view model. Try a left-handed model. If you like it, use it. If you don't. It may very well be that simple. At least until we can get some bona fide scientists to study Woxic's brain.
And that was the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
So there you have it. Did a view model switch really awake Woxic from his early CS2 induced stupor? Honestly, maybe. The side on which your view model sits is no different than any other aspect of your setup. Hotkeys, sensitivity, even your entire mouse. Once you get used to it, switching is just gonna mess up your game. Even if it is just placebo, it can make a huge difference. Imagine literally seeing the game one way for an entire decade and then just having it reversed suddenly. I've used the exact same mouse sensitivity and crosshair for 6 years. At this point, I couldn't switch if I wanted to. Even the slightest deviation would throw me for a loop. And ultimately, that's what configs are all about. Comfort. Comfort of any kind is king. So if you've never given left-handed a shake, try it. See if you like it. But don't do it because of some myth surrounding hand or eye dominance. Do it because you want the game to feel better, to feel like an extension of you, which is the entire point of a view model. When you achieve that, you'll be at your best. I couldn't have, my hottest take is I could not have cared less. When they were, I feel for all my lefty, I had teammates at the time who were lefties, and I feel bad for them because they were craving Bob, but I just like, bro, the game felt so shit. It felt so bad at the time. I mean, it still feels bad, but it felt so bad back then that I was like, I just want the game, I want to fix the fucking netcode, dog.